most wonderful and unique thing about Wendell is that he has been willing to share the knowledge that he learns with everybody and anybody who asks him. And this is so wonderful and so special and so rare. And tonight, he is coming to share a little bit of this knowledge with all of us again, yet again. And it's a rare treat tonight because he's going to talk on a subject that, in truth, for the last, 8 or 10 years anyway, it's a subject that he has been reluctant to continue talking about. He says, the Meier case, the Pleiadian case, that's old news. We did that investigation, years ago. I've said everything I have to say on it. And that's pretty much where he's left it, and he's moved on to newer stuff. Now, there are generations of people that are now interested in the phenomena, and many of them really don't know much about the Billy Meier case. So, a brief word about Jim Della Tosa. Jim was the man that did the original photographic analysis on the Meier photos and negatives. And unfortunately, he had planned to be with us tonight, but I do know that for a fact that he has a major negotiation going on with Lucasfilms, Industrial Light and Magic right now, and some other very big Hollywood players on a couple of projects. And this is, of course, his livelihood now. Regretfully, he is not with us tonight, but we do have his sincere apologies to convey to all of you that he's not here. He is, of course, the head of the UFO band who will be performing for us in concert on Saturday night. So you all will get a chance to meet Jim. And if any of you want to talk to him personally about the photographic analysis on the Meier photos, I'm certain that he will be equally receptive to speaking to any of you on an individual basis. So listen, I've talked much longer than I should have here, but I wanted to give you some background on this whole evening. And right now I'm going to bring Colonel Wendell Stevens up, and please give him a great round of applause.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? First of all, I want to thank you all for coming to this meeting tonight. I'm going to do this extemporaneously. So I'm going to start from the beginning of the case and go from there and tell you details that have never been published anywhere and events that happened in sequential order as best I can remember them. So with that, Pleiades almost seems like an unpleasant word today, the way it's abused and bandied around and misused, but it's a very important word. The Pleiades are a very prominent star group in our history and mythology. Everything mentions the Pleiades someplace or other. It's in all of the mythological lore of all of the countries of the world, as a matter of fact. So, did this Meier case that is so controversial, did it start with Billy Meier? No. His case didn't start there, and there were other cases of visitors, human beings, coming here from the Pleiades before Mr. Meier's case with them started in 1975. In 1958, there was a man named Lloyd Zerbes up at St. Cloud, Minnesota, who began having contacts with beings who said they came from the Pleiades, and his contacts went on until about 4 years ago when he died of a cancer, and they went on all that time, and these Pleiadians conveyed a lot of information to him. He never wanted to get any public attention. They gave him technical data. They discussed physics and science, many sciences with him, very much like they did with the ones in Switzerland with Billy Meier. The Pleiadians that were visiting Minnesota were not the same Pleiadians as the one visiting Meier. Now, the word Pleiadians was our reference to that group. They have another name for themselves. We call them Pleiadians because they said they came from a star group that we call the Pleiades. Very apt name. The same thing with the others. The others came from the Pleiades, but they came from different star systems in the Pleiades. When we finally tied down the source of the Pleiadians visiting Switzerland, they said they came from a star that we call Taygeta. It's about the fourth brightest star in the 7 bright stars that make up the Pleiades. The case in Minnesota, in that case, the Pleiadians said that they came from a star group that around the major star that we call Alcyone. There's another Pleiadian group that said they came from a star, or human beings that come from what we call the Pleiades, said they came from a system around the star Merope. There was a Pleiadian case in South America involving an attorney, Enrique Castillo Rincon, who participated in a metaphysical study group, and beginning first with telepathic contact and then going on from there with some sightings. And then they were invited telepathically to choose a representative in that group for a meeting with those human beings who said they came from the Pleiades. Now, they didn't tell them initially this came out in the discussions later. But they chose Enrique Castillo Rincon to represent the group, and he followed the instructions, went out into a remote area south of Colombia, about 12 miles south of Bogota, Colombia, and met human beings who got out of a big spaceship and talked to him. They invited him aboard, and he went, and he had several subsequent visits aboard the spacecraft. That's another entire story in itself, and that began in the middle 60s, also before the contacts with Billy Meier began. So those are three cases. There are a couple more that I am aware of, and two of them began before the Meier case. So we can't say that they are copying Billy Meier. We might say that he's copying them, but he was not there, and the information on two of those cases was never published. So the thing of interest here is, when did it all begin? It looks to me like the Meier case didn't start with the Pleiades. It started with another group that identified him when he was, actually, there's evidence that it started when he was a baby, when he was dying of pneumonia in the crib, and he was given up for dead. The doctor left, said he won't live until morning. And miraculously, he was breathing well in the morning, and he had almost fully recovered. Later, the Pleiadians mentioned they're saving his life at that time. He didn't know anything about this, of course. And when they mentioned it to him, he went back and asked his parents if there was something strange about the early days of his birth, and they told him yes, he had a miraculous survival. So that was the first clue that he got that there was direct interference in his life. At about the age of 8, there was a direct contact where he and his father saw an object pass, a disc-shaped object, pass at low level over a field where they were working. He asked his father about it, and his father said, "Oh, it must be one of those new German weapons." They live right across the border from Germany. They could see the bombers bombing the city right across, and they wrote it off. But he thought that couldn't be the case because it was huge. It was a large disc flying at low level. Then later, a few years later, when he was about 10 or 11 years old, now he's seen things in the sky ever since. He got to where he could look up, and he could see them in the daylight in the deep sky. He could look through the blue and see them up there, and he knew they were there. And then he saw them at night also. Then another close approach, and a pear-shaped metallic, silvery gold metallic craft landed in a field in front of him. A door opened, and an old man got out and invited him to come aboard. And he did at that time, and when he got in the ship, he noticed that they took off because the ground receded from them, but he wasn't afraid. The old man talked to him very gently, and he set him down in a chair there, in a seat, put a helmet of some kind over his head, a big helmet with lights and wires and things going into it, lights on it. And in a few minutes' time, they inculcated a vast amount of knowledge in his head, just pumped in somehow into his subconscious mind. And then after that happened, triggering events would awaken realization of some of these things that he knew, but he didn't know how he knew them. So with the knowledge that was instilled in his mind, he was able to attend school, although he attended very seldom because he was the poorest, among the poorest of the boys in the school. And because he didn't have shoes and he didn't have new clothes and things for school, the more affluent boys picked on him, and they would set him up as the butt of pranks. They would pull a joke on the teacher, make it look like Meier did it, and he would frequently get punished for it. And the time came when this seemed to be a regular thing, and the boys took pride in getting it over on Meier. He began to think, well, if the teacher can't see through this, and the boys are getting away with it, then I really am superior to them because I know both. I know they're doing it, and I know the teacher doesn't understand this, and he'd take his punishment and say nothing. But because of this, he didn't go to school very often. And he got to where in his fourth year, I think he only attended school something like 26 days, and in the fifth year, 17 or something like that, and fifth grade. And they passed him out of the fifth grade to get him out of there because they regarded as a troublemaker, and he never went back to school after that. So he doesn't have much of a formal education, but he has a pretty good mind for any of those that have read the stuff that he translates from the contact notes. And he became, because he left school early, of course, the truant officers were looking for him too. He went to work on a farm, and he drove a tractor. He did a number of things. Because of his reputation in the school, it kind of rubbed off, and he didn't have the best reputation in the town of Bullock, where he was raised and lived. And the time came when they thought that they'd lock him up because he was the troublemaker in town, and they took him to the local mental hospital. He escaped from there the first day by using simple things in his cell, and they picked him back up again, put him back in there, and put him in an isolation cell on the second floor with a high window, and locked him in. And it only took him 2 days to figure out how to, with things available in the cell, to make a way to loosen the bars and get out through the window. And he let himself out the window and dropped 2 stories to the ground, injured his ankle, and made his way to the Rhone River, or the Rhine River that went past there. As soon as he heard them starting to search for him, they got dogs and they chased him to the river, and he jumped in and floated down the river to the French border, where he went ashore in trying to get help for an ankle that's now badly swollen. Somebody referred him to the French police, who suggested that he could get medical treatment at the Foreign Legion office. They recruited him into the French Foreign Legion, and he was assigned to Algeria for training. Now, that's the worst of the outposts in the French Foreign Legion, and it's a tough place to be, and all your old Foreign Legion stories are based on the Algerian outpost, but that's where he was. And he was there for a time. He made friends easily. He was a congenial fellow, but now he had better clothes than he had before, and he was eating better, and he tired of it in a few months' time and decided he was going to leave. Well, the old sergeant of his troop said, "You can't leave. Nobody ever leaves here alive." And he said, "But I'm going anyway." And the old sergeant said, "Well, if you're going, let me give you a piece of advice. Get to water as soon as you can. Nobody else makes it across the desert alone." And he took another man with him, and he ended up having to carry the other man a long ways. He got a long ways from the Legion outpost. They never did catch up to him, and he was at the point of death from lack of water when he came over a hill and he found an oasis, and they survived. He joined a caravan from there and traveled with the caravan, learning their customs, learning their religion, how they thought, how they believed, and that sort of thing. So he had a very colorful beginning, and about this time, the old man that had been training him, or about shortly before this, the old man said that he visited him for the last time, and he said, "I won't see you anymore. Another teacher will take over, another instructor will take over." And it was some months, I think, before he heard the voice of the new instructor. It was a female voice. It turned out to be a human being, again, who called herself Asket. She said she came from what she called the doll universe, and that her mission was to help prepare him, to educate him for a future task. Now, it was Asket who led him through all of the major religions, one by one, where he lived in those societies. He learned their religion. He became a Sunday school teacher, or the equivalent of a Sunday school teacher in several of them. He worked his way across the desert with a salt caravan or a camel caravan. He got to the Red Sea. He was captured by pirates, and he was imprisoned aboard a pirate ship for a time. They put him ashore in Turkey, and he made his way across the Middle East there to India, where he lived in an ashram for a year. So he has a very colorful background. Now, strangely, last month in New York, was almost a year ago in New York, I was at a Whole Life Expo, and I was late because my airplane was late. I had to take a taxi in to the hotel because nothing else would get me there in time, and I ran up the stairs and was running down the corridor. There's a man on the platform like this, trying to hold it until I got there. And as I ran down the corridor, a lady grabbed my arm and said, "I got to see you after this." And I said, "Okay, when I get off, I'll talk to you." And when I came out, she was waiting again, and she introduced herself. She said, "My name is Phobal Chang." And she said, "I was a 10-year-old girl in the ashram where Meier was living at the time, and I would like to tell you a little bit about what we knew of Mr. Meier there." She had a little 8-year-old brother at the time. She was the granddaughter of the head of the ashram. Her family lived there. They liked Mr. Meier because they spoke a little bit of English. Meier spoke English. He spoke some Hindi also. But they liked Mr. Meier because he had a pet monkey. And he would let the little boy play with the monkey and make him do tricks. The monkey could do some marvelous tricks. And so she remembered him very, very well. And we were sitting at a table in the Pennsylvania Hotel in New York, and she said, but the villagers around there kind of regarded him as strange. And I said, "Strange? What do you mean strange? What, they think he was crazy?" She said, "Oh no, they didn't think he was crazy." She said they thought that he was in touch with a celestial woman, or he's being visited by a celestial woman, because some of the eyes around the ashram there's a lot of eyes in India, had seen him taking pictures of the spacecraft and had even seen him talking to the occupant of the spacecraft outside of it on the ground in India. Now, this was a corroboration I'd never heard of before. I didn't know that Meier had a monkey. I didn't know that he knew a 10-year-old girl and an 8-year-old boy there in the ashram. I didn't know who ran the place or anything else. So I wrote Mr. Meier a letter, and I asked him if he knew somebody by the name of Phobal Chang, and did he have a monkey? And he said yes. He wrote back a very nice letter. He said, "Yes, I had a monkey. I named him Emperor Hanuman." Hanuman is the name of the monkey king in mythology, in the Oriental mythology. And he said, yes, he did a lot of tricks. He said he could do a lot of tricks. He said, I've always wondered what happened to those kids, the boy and his sister. He said, I think of them every once in a while. And how did you find them? And could you put me in touch with them? So I did. And on our way back to, the Phobal Chang now is a diplomat in the United Nations. She represents her country, Cambodia, as an international diplomat. She was going back to her country for rebriefing additional information, and I gave her Mr. Meier's address, and she went to see him, and he welcomed her. He took her around with him for several days. When he went to the doctor, he took her along there, renewing old acquaintances. And she came back and said she had the most marvelous visit and renewing of acquaintances with the man. And she said, he is really a spiritual man. They regarded him as a spiritual man when he was in the ashram. So that was interesting, because I didn't have that information before. I didn't even know for sure that he'd been to India, except I had some photographs that were given to me by somebody else one time. That was a copy of a picture that was published on the front page of the New Delhi newspaper, and it showed 8 luminous spots in the sky over the railroad station. It was taken before a crowd of 2,000 people at the railroad station. They're waiting for a train to come in India. They get on the train, they hang on the sides, they ride on the top and everything else. And they was waiting for a train to come in, and these things gyrated all over the station there for a number of minutes, enough time for word to get to the New Delhi newspaper that there was a craft over the railroad station, unusual aircraft, and they sent a reporter to the station to do the story. He got there, people in the crowd pointed out Meier as a man with a camera that had taken the pictures, and the reporter went to Meier and asked him if he could borrow the film, and Meier gave him a roll of film. He took it back to the newspaper office, developed it, and they printed 2 pictures on the front page of the New Delhi Times, and sent the pictures and negatives to Mr. Meier after that. So I asked Meier about the pictures, and he showed me other pictures that he had taken in India, about a dozen he had. And I even published some of those in the first book I had, but I didn't have a lot of information on them. So in this letter, when I asked him about the pictures and about the monkey and about the kids, he said, I took over 300 photographs in India at that time of the spacecraft flying, maneuvering above and around the ashram and the railroad station in New Delhi City. And he said, I had all those pictures. I kept contact notes. He said I had good contact notes on those contacts. There were scores of contacts with the woman who called herself Osket from the doll universe. And he carefully guarded his notes, but he sent copies of important ones out to a few friends in Europe. He also sent copies of some of the pictures. When he was coming back from India, he was unemployed all this time, so he's making his living by working at whatever he can do as he goes around the country. He was a snake catcher, he was a veterinarian, he dug graves, he begged for a living, everything you can imagine to keep body and soul together. And on his way back from the ashram now, he's carrying some baggage. He's got his contact notes, he's got his photographs, and he's got some clothes and things that he'd accumulated there. And he accepted a job with American drug enforcement people, intelligence agents pursuing a drug running ring in Turkey. And he infiltrated the ring, the Turkish ring, and was arrested with them when they were arrested coming across the border into Jordan, was thrown into jail with the rest of the ring, punished, beaten, and they took all of his things away. And when we finally got him released, they just opened the door and told him to go and don't look back. He didn't get anything back, but he carried with him. He lost his contact notes, he lost his pictures, he lost everything in Jordan. So he doesn't have a whole lot of record of what happened in India. He only has what he was able to recover from friends in Europe that he had sent out while he was there, and that's 3 or 4 of the contact notes and about a dozen or more of the pictures. So, how did I get involved in all of this? I was collecting UFO photographs, been doing that for a long time, and probably a dozen years or more before this, and I had over 2,000 pictures in my file, photographs of UFOs. And I had been exchanging UFOs with UFO collectors, investigators all over the world, and I had a lot of contacts. One person that I was exchanging information with was Lou Zinstag in Switzerland. She was a multilingual journalist who published the first UFO journal in Europe in German in Basel, Switzerland. It was her area where this was all taking place, and shortly after Meier got back with the first pictures taken on the 28th of January 1975, they came to the attention of Lou Zinstag. She went to see him, and she found a poor farmer living as a guard on a property, a caretaker on a property that was not being occupied by the owners. And it was a very simple family, a man with a wife and 2 or 3 children they had at the time. She talked to him about the case and about the pictures that he had been taken. And her first question, she was a devout fundamentalist Christian. And one of the first questions she asked him was about, did they have Jesus Christ? And he said, no, they don't have that concept there. They don't have their creation is not personified in our image. It's not like us. So this turned her off a great deal, because this flies in the face of her basic religion, and she's an older lady, and she didn't want to give that up. So she said, well, I like the man. He's a simple man, but he doesn't have Jesus Christ. The beings may not be all that good. But he gave her about 12 of the pictures at the time. And she took the 12 pictures back home, and she wrote me and told me that she had something very interesting to show me, and she thought that she ought to show them to me personally, that she was going to come to the United States in 2 weeks, and if I'd meet her at the bus station, she would bring them with her. So a few weeks later, 2 weeks later, I met them at the bus station. They called me from New York and told me which bus they were on. And when they arrived, it was Lou Zinstag and Timothy Good traveling together. And they were on their way. They were bringing the pictures to show me of the Meier case, 12 of them. But they were also basically here to do their own investigation of the Adamski case. And they were interested in investigating what could still be investigated of the Adamski case. They're on their way to Vista, California to talk to any of Adamski's old neighbors and relatives that might still be around there to reinforce some information. Now, Lou Zinstag had a very personal interest in the Adamski case because when he went to Europe on the 2 trips he made there, she was his translator. She went around with him as his translator in the Netherlands, and when he went to the Vatican in Italian, and in German around the central part there. And she was very much impressed by the Adamski figure, and she kept a lot of notes on things that they were doing. She kept a diary and made notes on Adamski and himself. And they were over here to re-verify information from which Timothy Good later wrote a book on Adamski. And he started with Lou Zinstag's manuscript, which was the notes that she had been preparing on Adamski and her experiences with him since his visits to Europe. And he had now passed on, died of pneumonia in New York, or in Maryland. And she was going to publish her notes in the form of her own book on Mr. Adamski, which was her personal knowledge of what happened, and a lot of strange things happened while they were in Europe. So Timothy is traveling with her and was a little bit stronger figure, and he started with her notes, then he added a whole lot of notes of his own, and then he took a bunch of her notes out, so that when Timothy Good's and Lou Zinstag's jointly written book came out, she still was dissatisfied because the story hadn't been told the way she wanted it told. So she sent me her original basic manuscript of notes on the case. The book that she wanted to write wasn't written. She still wanted to publish that book. So I took them, I put them in my file, and I had them there. I had them there for years. And when the poor lady died some years ago, I took them out and I looked at them, and I thought, there's really a lot of information here that has never come out. I'll publish them. So instead of trying to modify them or rewrite them, I took her notes, warts and all, with her handwritten corrections in there, photocopied them and reduced them to pages, and printed that book you see in there, George Adamski, Their Man on Earth. That's Lou Zinstag's book. That's her title. I didn't change anything. The notes inside are the same. Her editing errors are there. Everything. But it's her personal idea and feeling about George Adamski. Now, this was a problem for her also because in the Meier case, when Mr. Meier took an interest in any other UFO case or any other UFO figure, the Pleiadians would tell him, don't need to pay any attention to them, it's no good, it's a hoax, or it's being faked, or something like that. And Meier was interested in Adamski because he was popular at the time, and the Pleiadians told him not once, but a number of times, that Adamski was a big fraud. They told him one time that Adamski didn't take the pictures that were attributed to Adamski, that they were taken by another woman and stolen by Adamski, or that he conned her out of them. And, of course, that's not entirely true either. So we found that the Pleiadians didn't always tell the exact truth. They told Meier what they wanted him to believe, whether it was really true or not. They were guiding his thought patterns, guiding his reactions, controlling everything developing him the way they wanted him to develop. So Meier never did like Adamski. He always thought the case was a fraud. They did this to a number of other key figures that we had substantial reason to believe were legitimate and real, like the Kelvin Rowe case and several others that involved spacecraft of the design that Adamski was talking about. Now, when they got to, they looked for the intelligence agents that Adamski called his case officers. When Adamski started taking pictures, the Navy at Miramar Naval Air Station out there in California came to Adamski and asked him to watch a certain part of the sky and take whatever pictures, whatever he got, let them know about it. They knew that he was in telepathic contact with an intelligence. It was one of the reasons they came to him. So he took remarkable pictures, but every time Adamski had a substantial contact and reported it to the Navy case officer, finally they assigned a second one, so that if he couldn't catch the first one, he could get the second one. And then the Air Force would send an executive VIP jet out to Miramar Naval Air Station from Washington to pick him up and fly him back to Washington in a military jet. And they'd keep him overnight, debrief him, whatever they wanted to ask him and tell him, and then send him back in a VIP jet again the next day. So if his case was all such a fraud and everybody knew it, why were they doing this? But when Adamski was in Washington, I hope I'm not digressing here too much, the reason he wouldn't stay in the Pentagon. If he's going to be overnight at any time, the Pentagon always offered him a place to stay, and he wouldn't stay with the military because he's afraid they'd do something to get control of his mind, put something in his drink, hypnotize him, or something like that. And so he wouldn't stay. He'd say, no, I'm leaving, and he'd walk out of the Pentagon, go across, take the ferry across to the other side, and go to the Rotifer's house. Madeline Rotifer and her husband lived on the Maryland side, across from the Pentagon, and he used to go over there because he had known them from before, and he would stay with them. And this is what Lou Zinstag and Timothy Good were running down. And when they got to Madeline Rotifer's house and asked her about the movies that were attributed to Madeline Rotifer of the spacecraft visiting Adamski, Madeline told him, well, he was here one time, and we were having breakfast in front of the French doors with a patio outside. And she said, we were having tea, and the doorbell rang. She went to the doorbell to answer it. There were two men out there. And she let them in. They said they were there to talk to Mr. Adamski. She let them in, and he recognized them right away as two of the aliens, his contacts. They were dressed in business suits, looked like you and I. Walked in the house, and they motioned for him to look out the window, and this thing was flying out over the garden there, and they all went outside, the two Venusians, Adamski and Madeline Rotifer. And as she went out, she grabbed a camera off the shelf and was trying to film it, but she was shaking so bad, Adamski reached over and says, here, let me do that. He took it, and he filmed the pictures, the footage that you see, if you've ever seen it, and handed it back to her and said, there. So those pictures were taken by Adamski in front of two alien men standing there watching the whole thing at that time. So the Adamski case can't be written off that easily. There's a whole lot more to this, and this is what Timothy Good and Lou Zinstag were checking out and following up on when they came here on the Meier case. So the Pleiadians took great pains to make Meier think that the Adamski case was a total fraud because of all these other things that are now becoming involved in it. So when I got there the first time, Adamski, I found him. First of all, I didn't have the right address. My contact began with Lou Zinstag, but after 2 or 3 letters, she said, this is too much. I can't keep up with it all. I'm going to refer you to another friend of mine, a multilingual journalist, Ilse von Jacobi, who has written an article on Adamski, and she'd be glad to translate a few of your letters. So I sent a couple of them through Ilse von Jacobi, and she would translate them to German, send them to Meier, and Meier would write an answer in German. They'd go to Ilse von Jacobi or Lou Zinstag, and they'd translate them again into English and send them to me. And finally, this got to be an awful long process. More pictures were coming each time, and it was beginning to look like there was a lot more. They told me there were over 300 at that point. And I thought, my God, this is going to take forever. I'll just have to go over there. And about that time, I got my income tax refund back, bought tickets, and went to Switzerland to find him. When I left, I didn't have an address for him or not. My addresses were to Lou Zinstag and Ilse von Jacobi. So when we got to Germany, I went to Ilse von Jacobi's house and asked her to take me to Meier. So she said, okay, but after we got to Switzerland and Zurich, she said, you know, I don't really know where he lives because I've never been here before, but I think we can find it. So we started out from Zurich, and if you've ever been to Switzerland, there's little tiny street signs there with points on the end that identify all the streets. We couldn't find any signs that said anything about Schmidrudi. They had moved by that time, and they were in the location they're in now. So I had another lady with me who said claimed she was psychic, and Ilse von Jacobi, of course, said she was psychic. They said, we can find him. So we're driving a rented car in Switzerland. They said, turn here. And I say, are you sure? Turn here. There's no sign that says anything about where we're going. We just turned. And you know, we drove right up to Meier's house and parked in his driveway right in front of the place. And then Ilse says, I believe that's the house. I think that's Mrs. Meier looking out the window. And we went up, sure enough, that was it. So that was the first indication we had that there was some other kind of outside influence involved here. We didn't know how we got there. And this is an example, though, of how these things happen. We call it synchronicity, but you'll find later that there's a whole lot more to this than that simple synchronicity. When I sat down in front of Mr. Meier, he, at his coffee table, which is a big oak door with 4 legs on the corners, and they fixed us a cup of coffee, and I sat down there on one side with Dilspa and Jacoby to do my translating, and Meier on the other side, and I said, I'm sure glad to finally get here and talk to you across the table. I'm tired of these letters. And he answered, I'm pleased to meet you, Mr. Stevens, and I am glad you're here. Now, my translator said he couldn't speak a word of English, and here he's just done it. He answered me in English. So I looked at her, and her mouth is open, and she's looking at me, and she said, but he doesn't speak any English. I said, he just did. So then I tried to talk slowly and simply, and most of his answers were in English, and occasionally he would answer in German, and she would translate that. Now, every question I asked him, he looked me right in the eye, right straight in the eye. Never wavered. He was a simple man. I discovered soon on that he wouldn't tell a lie for any reason in the world. He claimed he was an anti-materialist. He wouldn't own anything. He didn't carry any money in his pockets. He didn't have any personal possessions but his moped, which somebody had given him, and he had a broken camera that somebody had tossed away that he had fished out of the salvage someplace and had it. That's what he was taking the pictures with. This camera had the lens, the focus adjustment on the lens. The ring was jammed. It had been dropped, and it was jammed just a little bit short of the infinity setting. And the mirror, it had a window beside the lens. It was not through the lens focusing. It was the kind that has the window on the side. And it has a mirror in it to give you the correct parallax so you could shoot a decent picture with it. The drop had broken the mirror loose. You couldn't even look through it anymore. So he shot his pictures by holding his camera out this way because he couldn't look through it anyway. And with a focus adjustment he couldn't control, and he used one light setting. He used f11. He shot everything at f11 and 125th of a second on ASA 100 film. All those beautiful pictures were shot that way. That's how good a photographer he was. He really didn't know anything about photography at the time. And he didn't care. His camera worked, and he could use it. Now, after he had taken the first few sets of pictures, friends tried to give him better cameras. And he took the better cameras with him and tried to use them, but he couldn't work them with one hand. The little one that he had rescued from the salvage was a small Japanese Ricoh-type camera that he could do everything. He could hold the camera in one hand, roll the film, snap the pictures, and everything else, and he always went back to that. He just couldn't use the bigger cameras. So here I find a man who is taking beautiful pictures of UFOs. He's got one arm. He lost one in an accident, and he can only do this with one arm. He's taking these marvelous pictures with good scenery that look like somebody posed the ships and everything else. And the composition was even good. There were marvelous pictures. And he didn't know anything about photography. He's using a broken camera, and I'm thinking, he's getting some help someplace. But I took the pictures, I brought them home from that trip, and I started looking for somebody to do some analysis on them. I knew that Ground Saucer Watch was testing pictures and claimed they had a way to do this. So I went to Ground Saucer Watch first. They didn't have time to mess with me. They looked at them and said, yeah, they're fakes. And I thought, well, they don't know enough about them, or they wouldn't be saying that. So we started looking for somebody with an open mind. And we were looking for, we had other evidence too at the time. I had a piece of metal, I had a number of things, and we were looking for a scientist who had an open mind, probably a cross-disciplinary scientist that wasn't locked into peer pressure in any particular field. And we found this in the case of Mr. Jim Dilatoso. Didn't even have a degree. But Jim Dilatoso had gone to school until he was 28 years old. He had gone to college long enough to have gotten a half a dozen degrees if he had decided to specialize in anything and wrote the papers. But he liked going to school. He was what we call a professional student. He liked going to school. His family could afford it. He just kept going to college, taking more subjects, more subjects, more subjects. He'd taken all the electives, and I was taking all the sciences. And so when we started talking to De La Tosa and trying to figure out how are we going to get a hold of this, how are we going to analyze this material, he says, well, let's start with the experts. So he went to Ground Saucer Watch and talked to them, asked them how they were doing this. We found that they were bootlegging their time on a computer, an old computer with a minimum 5-micron window, which is big for a computer. And the computer was one that was used to analyze flaws in castings for jet engines. And they were doing it at night on that computer, and they were using 4 steps that didn't show them anything. So De La Tosa immediately recognized that this is not scientific. They're eyeballing it and making the computer say what they want it to say, and then writing up a little story describing what was going on and getting away with it. So we talked to Bill Spaulding's second-hand man, asked him if we could get a look at the equipment. So we did, and we found out that it was manufactured by Spatial Data Systems at Goleta, California. So we went out to Spatial Data Systems to find out what they knew about the system. And they said, oh yeah, this system, they came out here and looked at it. They said a man came in here and looked over our equipment and gave us this 4-point program for analysis. He gave us a name, it's a very famous name today in UFO research. But they said that what we really needed to do was find out a way to do what we wanted to do, that the procedure that was being used wasn't the best. We said, well, can you demonstrate it? So they went to their showroom where they had a new model of the same equipment that was being used by Air Research in Phoenix, and they took the shade off from a lamp on a table, turned the 100-watt bulb over the picture we laid on the table, picked up a Panasonic home video, about a $1,200 job, and holding it by hand like this, shot the picture to get it into memory, and then transferred that to the computer, and then that's what they analyzed. Well, right away they lost everything because they didn't have a stable mount. They're holding it by hand. They had incandescent light, 100 watts, and it was reflected from a thing on a table. There was no light table. There was no filters. The resolution on the camera itself was so bad it couldn't have shown anything anyway. So we thought, gee whiz, what are we up against here? This is no way to test anything. We've got to find a better way. So the people at Goleta said, go over to JPL. They're the ones that are making these beautiful pictures from this fuzzy image data that's coming back from the satellites, and maybe they can tell you how to do it. So we did. We went over to JPL, and we introduced ourselves at the front office, and we were ushered back into the office of Frank Bristow, who was the administrative supervisor of the JPL visitor's office at the time. And of course we had to sign in on the sign-in book and everything else to do this. To get in there at all, you have to do that. So we showed him the pictures, and he scratched his head and multiple. We wanted to talk to their image sciences people, the ones that were making good pictures out of the bad ones coming back from space. And he scratched his head and he said, well, he said, first of all, I want you to go out and sign out on the book and then come back to the office here. So we did, and then we went back into his office, and he pulled out his middle drawer in the desk, and he gave us internal badges. He says, use these, and when you go, give them back to me. Don't sign in or out anymore. Don't carry your cameras. No tape recorders, and I'll take you down to the Imaging Sciences Division. He took us down to see Bob Nathan, who later denied that we'd ever been there. But we were ushered into Bob Nathan's office, and we showed him the pictures, and he looked at them, and he said, oh, they look too good to be true. He said, they're probably fakes. We said, well, can you tell us how we could fake these? He thought a little bit, and he said, well, I don't know. Anything I think of just doesn't quite fit. He said, well, we can take a look at them. So then we're talking about UFO pictures now, and he says, these may be fakes, but he says, he pulled open his left drawer over here in his desk, top of his desk, and pulled out 4 pictures, and he says, these are real. I can tell you these are real because I've tested them exhaustively. Now, the pictures that he pulled out and handed us were the pictures, the Heflin pictures photographed at Santa Ana, California, that disappeared 5 years before that, and everybody thought the Navy stole them. Here he's got them in his upper left-hand drawer in his desk, and they were the original Polaroids taken with the county camera. And he's tested them. He says, these are real. He put them back in his desk. So he said, come on with me and we'll go down to Bob Post downstairs and have him make copies of the pictures. We had 4 pictures. Now, before we started testing, we decided that we would do the best we could, but we couldn't test them all. So we would pick the best picture in a series, in a sequence of 4 different sequences, 4 different pictures, from 4 different sequences, and the best of the lot for testing, the one that had the most image data in it. And that's what we were carrying with us to Bob Post's laboratory. And that's what we went downstairs and rephotographed, and he made negatives and positives and everything else and gave them back to us. And they ran their own testing, and they said, we can't give anything out of here. We're not in that business, but we'll tell you how we're doing it, and you can go to the manufacturer of the same equipment array. They were using De Anza equipment at JPL at the time, and we copied the model numbers off from everything that they used, and went to the De Anza factory where we set up another line and duplicated what they did the way they told us they were doing it to get the first image data report we had on the pictures, which turned out to be a pretty good one. When we found Jim Delatoso, going to back up a little bit here, he was working on a color synthesizer for, I think it was Motorola Systems, had commissioned him to find the color equivalent of sounds and try to create a device that would project colors in the same vibrational frequency but higher in the octave as the sounds. For instance, sound vibrates a certain frequency, an octave or 2 above, the same color may be red. And he was working on that when we found him. Later they patented the thing. But we picked him because he was a multidisciplinarian. He didn't have a degree. He wasn't stuck in anything. But wherever we went with him, wherever we took him, he spoke their jargon. And we discovered this immediately when we went to the computer manufacturers. They thought he was a computer manufacturer. And actually he was, in a sense, because his father was making computers at the time. But when we went to the laser people then, he spoke the laserology lingo. And they thought he was a laser expert because he spoke their language. Every discipline we went into has a characteristic lingo and a certain kind of language that those specialists in that field use. So everybody thought that he had a doctorate in whatever we were talking about. When we got to optical sciences, the same thing. And so we found that we could make friends in every discipline easily because of Jim's familiarity with everything. But because he's familiar with everything, he also knew more than most of the people who were disciplined only in that subject. And that's why they thought, gee, this guy knows more than we do. That's why we used him, and that's why we got in a lot of doors that we otherwise would not have gotten into. So later people come along and say, well, he doesn't even have a doctorate. Well, he didn't need a doctorate. He later wrote a paper, he did it in a week, and sent it in and got a doctorate. You know? So he didn't need it. But to come back to what we were doing now, we're doing our testing here. We're being challenged by everybody on the nature of our testing. And about this time, we were invited to go to the SPIES conference in San Diego. The SPIES conference is an imaging sciences conference where they draw in the latest state-of-the-art manufacturers, engineers, designers, programmers, and everything from all the big manufacturers all over the world into a conference in San Diego. And they do it once a year. And when we got to the De Anza Systems factory to try to use their equipment, they were getting ready to go to the SPIES conference, and they says, why don't you come with us down here? You can come as our guests, and we'll see what other people have to think about how we're doing this, and maybe we can get some good recommendations. So we went down there, and after they closed the exhibits every day, which was about 10 o'clock at night, we would get people that we had picked out that were manufacturing cutting-edge technologies. And we'd push them together in a big display room there and hook up new arrays, different arrays, and try different testing. We learned a whole lot of things out there. We learned that you can take a flat two-dimensional picture, for instance, and that in just a flat picture, black and white or color, you can find out how many objects are moving in the picture, which direction they're moving, about how fast, relative speed they're going. And this all had to do with things that we were learning as we proceeded. So we came back from there and set up a a testing program in Phoenix using special selected arrays from this and began testing our own pictures, and that's where we got the test data that we published. Now that was way back in 1979, so we've done it again in anticipation of what was going to be a pro and con discussion here. We convened another conference like the SPIES conference in Phoenix just a month ago and brought in optical sciences experts from all over the world by the Wrigley people, and they were interested in the optical sciences, and from that group we posed the problem: how do we test these things today? How could we get a better way to do it? And they studied it for a few days, and we invited some of the selected experts into another meeting in Dilatosa's office, and they said, well, your technique was pretty good before, but here's what we can do now. And so we had prepared to bring one of the experts from that meeting out here. He was impartial. He didn't believe in UFOs and didn't care whether they were real or not. And we were going to have him critique the methods used by the people that say that they have found a positive proof that these pictures are all faked. And they didn't come, so he didn't come. Now, back to the Swiss case. There were things that developed in this case as we were going that were unbelievable. First of all, when I got there the first time, Mr. Meier took me around to a number of the photographic sites, and we walked over them, and I could see right away that this is going to be difficult to suspend models in. You can't throw them in. You can't shoot them in. You can't. The terrain would slope down steeply like that for 1,000 feet. And the pictures were taken of the object out over the valley. The other side of the valley comes up 5 miles away. So there's no way they could be suspended. And I called Lee and Tom, from Intercept. They were friends of mine in Phoenix with a little intelligence business, and they were performing debugging, electronic debugging of telephone systems and bank computer systems. And they were doing a job in London for some London banks, and they were there at the time. And I called him and said, you got to come over here and see what I'm seeing. This guy couldn't have faked these. And up to this point, I thought there may have been a way to do it. And I said, there's no way it can be done. So they came over the next day, and we walked over the sites again, drove over them. And looking at them once more, they said, well, this is going to take some sophisticated equipment, but we can work it out. We'll rent laser surveying instruments so we can measure distances across valleys. And we'll take pictures, we'll try to duplicate it, we'll make models and suspend them into the scene and all these things. And we went to a number of sites, and they came away. They said, we don't do this business, but this is interesting, because if he's faking it, he's got a new technique, and we're going to find out about it. Now, these men were licensed private investigators in the state of Arizona. They also had international licenses, which they were using in London, already had business in Zurich. And so we did. We rented laser surveying instruments to shoot distances across valleys. We could measure distance, we could measure levels, we could measure elevations, we could measure a lot of things. And we brought the data back to Jim Dilatosa, and using the geometry of the lens and the distances that we measured, we could calculate the approximate size of the craft very easily. From the photographs, with other techniques, we could tell whether they were moving or not, which direction they were moving. So now we're building a database that was very interesting and becoming quite exciting. We had metal specimens that we took out to a private laboratory. The head of the IBM research, the designer of the inventor of the floppy disk and magnetic tape, Dr. Marcel Vogel. Well, he wasn't even a doctor. He was like Jim Dilatosa. He was a genius when he invented the floppy disk and the tape for IBM. And he had a laboratory in his house, and he agreed to test our metal specimens for us because he was a metallurgist to begin with. And he's the one that did the testing that came later that showed that this was probably a material. You going to leave, Michael? Oh, okay. Probably a metal specimen that couldn't be duplicated any way that they know how. So now I've had them over there, and this is my second trip. And we came back from there, and they agreed, although this was not the business of Intercept, and they shouldn't get involved in anything as kooky as this, if we could keep it low level, that they would help me conduct the investigation. By this time, I had been back once to APRO, and I now knew that the investigation isn't anything anybody's going to conduct in a short time. You can't do it in a few days, and you can't do it in a parlor like was the normal procedure for UFO groups. They'd go to a case, interview the man in his house over the coffee table, make some notes, and go back and file a report. This was going to take some in-depth work, and it's going to take staying time. It's going to take weeks, maybe months, and several trips and a lot of money. So I was trying to get support for this. I realized there's no UFO club in the country that can afford to conduct the kind of investigation that would be necessary to find out what's really going on with this case and with these beautiful pictures. And once they agreed to do this over the telephone, things began to change. We began to be followed every place we went. Our telephones were tapped. At first, this was very disturbing because they didn't know why it was being done. Why would, if our government denies the existence of UFOs, why are they tapping our phones and following us around? I was followed so often, I knew which cars were the cars that were doing the following. I could recognize them, and they would stay. They'd keep at least one car between me and them all over town and wherever we went, any place. So when we were going to have a meeting to discuss something, Lee would call me at home, and he'd say, go to a public telephone and call me back at such and such a number in 5 minutes. If you don't make it in 5 minutes, go back home, wait for another call. I'd go do that, call him from the grocery store in front of the Circle K or whatever I could, and he'd say, meet me at the usual place. By the time I got halfway across town, my green Cadillac, or Lincoln, it was a green Lincoln sedan, would be behind me. It was driven by a man who once ran for county attorney in the city of Tucson. He was always there. He's an elderly man, wore a nice business suit, gray hair, but I couldn't shake the guy. And they had relays too. They could pass it off. So I'm telling Lee, why are they doing this? If there's nothing to this, why is this going on? And so we used to meet at Picacho. It's a landmark between Tucson and Phoenix where we could go up the side of a hill and see everything below us coming from every direction. And we found that later they had even bugged the site where we're meeting. We gave too much away. So now a time came when we're going back for the second trip, and we've talked about it a couple of times on the phone, and then we went to these strange secrecy techniques like kids, trying to get away with something, and we decided that they decided they would join me in the investigation, which now is going to be a deviation from their pattern. And a few days after that, about 10 days after that, Lee got a letter in the mail from the Knights, with the return address on the corner said the Knights Templars of Malta, and it came from London. It was an airmail letter. And inside, on engraved parchment, was a typed letter that said, we believe we have interests in common. Please, and that you may be coming to Europe in the near future, please contact us by telephone. Well, we decided we wouldn't contact them by telephone. We didn't need any help. And what were they talking about? We hadn't a good idea what they were talking about, but we were not going to tell anybody. We were trying to keep the whole thing secret. So we didn't respond. And 2 weeks later, we got another letter in the mail. This time it came on House of Lords stationery, engraved stationery again. Now, the first letter from the Knights Templars of Malta was signed, after the brief little 2-paragraph message, was signed Mark Nathan, Secretary General of the Knights Templars of Malta. We reject that. We don't do anything about it. The next one that came on House of Lords stationery, and it's a letter inside the same way. And this one was another invitation. Says, you didn't respond to our last letter. We still are interested in a communication. Please contact us as soon as you get to London. Now, we hadn't told anybody we were going to London. I hadn't even told my daughters I was going to London. So we decided to ignore that one too. Now this letter on the House of Lords stationery was signed again, Mark Nathan, Secretary before the Rod or something like that it was. It's a strange secretary title that's used in the House of Commons in London. And now he's got our curiosity because it's the same name and the same signature on 2 different important letterheads. So we decided we would wait until we got out of Switzerland and call him on the way back. We didn't want anybody to know where we were or what we were doing. And these guys, because they were private investigators, always insisted on the greatest secrecy. I mean, they went to great pains to obscure everything that we were doing. And so we bought the cheapest tickets possible on Laker Airlines, it was at the time, and we went to London in tourist class, steerage class in the back, and got off at the London airport and caught the subway. Now, how can anybody follow you on the subway? We caught the subway into town and got off at Victoria Station. Now, there's the subway, runs every 10 minutes. So if anybody's going to be able to pick something out, it's going to be tough. We got off the subway at Victoria Station and are going to the street to take a taxi cab to an old gunnery sergeant's house where we were going to stay. A friend that we had met before who had a walk-up. He was renting rooms in his walk-up. We weren't even staying in a hotel. And we came out of down the railroad platform heading for the taxi exit, and a big, tall, black cabbie, London cabbie, comes up to us, tapped Lee on the shoulder and says, "You're Mr. Elders?" Lee said, "Yes." He said, "Come with me." We said, we're going to take a taxi. We're tired. We want to go get some sleep. We have reservations. He said, "I have your reservations." So we thought, well, maybe the old gunner sergeant has sent him down there. So we got in his cab, put our bags in there, and he didn't drive us the direction we were going. We wanted to go out of London, and he took us right downtown London, around Hyde Park, and parked in front of the Grosvenor House. The Grosvenor House is a big apartment hotel on Hyde Park, right on the side of the Hyde Park, that looks at the American Embassy on one side and the Russian Embassy on the other. And he parked in front, said, "I'll lock the bags in the car, come with me," and he locked everything in there. We went in the lobby. He motioned to somebody, and another man came along. We got on an elevator, took us up to the third floor, and he's not giving us any opportunity to refuse or anything else. Now, there were some bars that could be drawn across at that time. I thought they were fire protection, but they may have been something else. Anyway, we got through, and we got off the elevator on the fifth floor, walked down to room number, I think it was 520 on the left-hand side. He knocked on the door, opened it. There was a man with spectacles and business suit behind the door. He said something to him, they motioned us in. It was a kind of a wet bar. There was a refrigerator, there was a little hot plate on one side, there was a sink, things like that, and another door on the other side of this little entryway. He went to that and opened it up and ushered us into a big sitting room. Big sitting room. It was about, for London, it was immense. It was about 20 feet one direction by 10 or 12 the other direction. And in that room was a large overstuffed sofa, four seats, four-cushion one, a big one, and a big, heavy coffee table. And then on the other side, to the left of it, was a shorter love seat type, two-cushion sofa. And over in the corner over here was a big black overstuffed chair with the big black fat arms and a little table on each side, on each arm. And on that side, facing the big lounge, the big sofa, were the picture windows, full wall of picture windows that looked out on Hyde Park. And we were introduced to Mark Nathan. And he's standing in front of this big, fat, black, overstuffed chair, and he smiles and he motions us to sit down, So I sat down on the big sofa. Lee and Britt were near the small one. They sat down on the two-cushion sofa. And he sat down, and I started to pull my pants up over my knees like that so they wouldn't be uncomfortable. And about that time, the white telephone on his right-hand side rang 10 short rings. Now, immediately, we knew what that was because we had been in Meier's house at a time when the Pleiadians would ring his telephone 10 short rings to let him know that what he was thinking was them and not his own thoughts. Early on, he wasn't clearly able to distinguish between telepathic transmissions and his own thoughts. And then, in that case, they would signal him 10 short rings on his telephone. Now, no telephone in the world can ring 10 short rings because there's only 6 lobes on the cam. You can get any combination of 6, you can't get 10. And we took his telephone apart to be sure of this, and he had the same kind of a phone. It's a bunch of rotary cams, and it can't be rung short. You can't get 10 rings of any kind. So here, we'd heard this in Meier's house. So here we're sitting in front of this Mark Nathan, who we don't know who he is at the time. And his phone rings 10 short rings, and he said, he tried to answer it, and there was nobody on the line. And he said, hello, hello, and he tried. And he says, well, that's strange, he said. I looked at Lee, and Lee and Britt looked at me, and we know what it is. We say, have you ever heard a ring like that before? He said, that was kind of strange, wasn't it? Lee said, do you think it rung 10 times? And he said, well, maybe. And he said, I'll find out. And he picked up his phone and he called down to the desk. He said, who rang? They said, no calls to your room. He said, could anybody call this room from any place else in the hotel? And they said, without going through the switchboard. There's been no calls to your room. And there were some more questions, and he put it down and shook his head and started to talk, and the red phone on the other side rang 10 short rings. So he says, I'll find out about this. And he picked it up and said, hello. There's nobody on there. And he says, this is a secure phone. It's monitored 24 hours a day. Nobody can dial in here that doesn't have a certain security clearance. He says, I'll find out about this. And he asked that operator, and he said, no, you haven't had any calls. No lights on the board. Nobody's called you. And he put it back up. And then he introduced himself, and he said his name was Mark Nathan, that he was the case officer for the London District. That's CIA case officer for the London District. That means he's in charge of the whole London District, and we're sitting in his office, and he's Mark Nathan, and he signed these two fake documents, the letter from the Knights Templars of Malta and the letter from the House of Commons in London. And then he proceeds to tell us that they're interested in what we're doing, that they haven't been able to get a man inside, and they wondered if we would talk to him on the way out. So we said, sure, we'll talk to you. And he wished us well and sent us on our way. They told us what they knew about the case, and we probably talked to him no more than 10 minutes, and he sent us downstairs, and he sent us to our residence in a big limousine, which probably surprised all the neighbors because the gunnery sergeant lived in a very poor neighborhood of London. And then, after that, every time we went in and out, we were picked up by the CIA, taken to his office, and we were either asked what we were going to do going in, or we were asked what we did when we came out. And if we were carrying pictures or anything, they asked to see them, and when we handed them to them, they'd take them out, and they'd bring them back 15 or 20 minutes later. We'd talk about various things, and we finally had been through his office so many times, we were getting to be on a first-name basis. We called him Mark, and he called us by first names. About the fourth time we came out, he said, look, my wife would like to fix you dinner tonight. Can you come by for dinner? So we said, sure. He said, I'll send the limo to pick you up. We're staying at the gunnery sergeant's place again. He said, I'll send the limo to pick you up about 5 o'clock. That'd be okay? And we said, sure, that's fine with us. So the limo arrived, and we got in it, and we went to his house, and he introduced us to his wife. His wife was an ethnic Chinese lady who was a Chinese intelligence agent. Sun Chi Lee, are you here? She was a Chinese intelligence agent before Mark Nathan met her. Mark Nathan was an American intelligence agent, and we came to the conclusion that it was a marriage of convenience. It gave us a channel into their operations and gave them a channel into ours. Why this had to be the Chinese, I don't know. But she was very gracious. She fixed a wonderful Chinese dinner, and we had a nice dinner that was very sociable. We talked about ordinary things. And afterwards, they invited us into their living room to have tea. And we sat down on the sofa and the chairs there, and things were proceeding very friendly when Mark Nathan got up and he said, I got something you'll be interested in. And he went to the table at the end of the sofa I was sitting on. It was a round end table with a lamp on it and some flowers. And he went to the end of the table at the end, he took the flowers off, set it on the floor, took the lamp off and set it on the floor, and picked up the table, and it was a shell. And under the shell was a safe. He knelt down, he says, don't look at me while I turn. Of course, he had his back between us and the numbers. And he twirled the dial, and he opened the safe, swung the door open, and he says, come here. And we went over there, and he first took out a package of passports and laid them on the floor. There's about 8 or 9 passports tied together with a rubber band. And Lee says, are all those yours? He said, yeah, I travel a lot. So Lee says, well, what countries are they? And he handed them to him. Lee took the rubber band off. There was India. He had a passport from India with his picture and signature, passport from Canada with his picture and signature, passport from a Scandinavian country, an American passport, a diplomatic passport, a security passport from, he had 8 of them, and his name and signature in them all. And Lee says, well, you must do a lot of traveling. He said, I really need them once in a while. And but he was setting things out, and he got down to a paper bag, a grocery bag, about that size. And he took it out, and he said, this is what I'm looking for. And in the course of getting to the bag, he moved a 8.5 by 11 mimeograph booklet that was about a 3/4 of an inch thick, had a blue cover, had a red stripe down from the upper right-hand corner to the lower left-hand corner. He took it out and laid it on the floor, and then he put some other things on it, and he handed the bag to Lee, and what was in the bag was miniature pickups. There were pickups in there so small that you could take the eraser out of a lead pencil, put the pickup under the eraser, push it back in place. There was a little wire that stuck up along the side. He said, this can transmit as much as 500 feet. But he had things that you could put them in a lot of other things too. And Lee said, boy, that is remarkable. Technology says this is the latest state of the art. So then he showed us a couple other things he showed that he had in there. And then he started putting everything back in, and he put the blue book with the red tape on it in there, and he put the passports on the top and closed the door and twirled the dial and put the shell back over again and the plants back on and the lamp. And we went on talking. And he drove us home in his limousine that night. We walked up our walk up 4 floors to the bedroom, and it was near midnight, and we were tired. And I walked in Lee's room with him and Britton, and he started undressing. He took his keys out of his pocket and laid them up on a wardrobe, a standalone wardrobe like that that you put clothes in. And he dumped all the change in his pocket up there, and he laid some other things down. He started taking his shoes off, and I said, well, I think I'll go to bed. And Britt said, well, we'll see you in the morning. And I heard him lock the door behind me. I went across the hall to my own room. It was right across from their door. The next morning, I get up early. The next morning, I was up about 5 o'clock, and I thought, before I left, I said, hey, I'm going to go down for early breakfast. If we wait too long, there's not much left, so if you want me to wake you up, fine. And Lee said, yeah, get me up, we'll go for a walk. So I get up about 5 o'clock, and I went across the hall and knocked on the door, and I heard a sleepy voice, and he come and unlocked it, and the hair's all over his head, and he's standing there in his shorts, and he said, oh, come on in, I'll get ready, get dressed. So we went in, and I sat down in a little chair beside the sink there, and he went over and got his shirt and put it on, pulled his pants on, and then reached over to get his change and his keys off the wardrobe, and they're not on the metal that he laid them on the night before. They're on top of a 8.5 by 11 blue book, about a 3/4 of an inch thick, with a blue cover and a red tape running from the upper right hand to the lower left hand corner across it. And he looks at it and he says, Jesus Christ, you ever seen this before? And I said, yeah, it was in that safe we looked at last night. He said, yeah. He says, what did it say? We looked at the cover, same thing. He says, oh, we got to call Mark and let him know what happened. Now we woke Britt up and says, how did this get here? And she says, I don't know, I didn't bring anything back last night. Do you bring anything back? No, we didn't bring anything back. And we're puzzling about this. He said, well, we got to let him know. So we went down to the phone at the landing in the stairs in the hallway, called Mark Nathan, got him out of bed, told him, we've got your blue book. He says, oh, no, you haven't. He says, it's in the safe. He says, well, you better look and see if it's still there, because we got one just like it in the room. So he said, just a minute, I'll take a look. And he came back about less than 5 minutes later, all out of breath, and he says, where did you get it? You haven't looked at it, have you? We said, no, we haven't looked at it. We're not concerned about it. He said, don't look. I promise you, you won't look at it. I'll be right there. And he whistled up in about 12 minutes in his limousine, ran all the way up the stairs, came to the door out of breath, and he says, where is it? And we said, we haven't touched it. It's right there right where we found it this morning. He picked it up and looked at it. He says, Jesus Christ. He says, how did you get it out of the safe? We told him, we don't know. And that was an example of what I call interference that was perpetrated by somebody. That was one example. There were lots of examples. This is what makes this case so credible. You don't have to ask me whether I believe it or not. I try not to assert that it's real, because there's a lot of things I don't like to assert. But there are things like this all through the case that make it highly credible to me. The ringing of the telephones, the things coming out of locked safes. We were coming out of there one time with some pictures, 300 pictures that I had bought from Mr. Boy. He always insisted on giving them to me, and I didn't want them free, and I'd pay him for the cost of reproducing them. And we're coming out with those, and when we got to the railroad station and got on the train, now we didn't have tickets or passports or anything. I mean, we had passports. We didn't have advanced reservations or anything. We got on a train and rode to the French border, and when you change trains in Switzerland when you go into France, by the time we got to the French border and changed trains and got on a car, there was nobody else on the car. There was a French officer sitting on one end, a police officer, And we got on the car, and we thought he was just monitoring traffic coming in. When the train pulled out, nobody else got on the car. We walked down to the other end. There's another police officer sitting on the other end of the car. And we asked him if there's anything about the car, and he, no. And we rode all the way across France, just 3 people in that whole darn train car with a French officer on each end all the way to the port, where we got off to go take the boat train across. Why that was, I'll never know. I've never been on a European train with nobody else on the car but me. And the only thing that was different is we had 300 pictures with us. And the officers never said anything. I don't think they even knew why they were there. And maybe they weren't there for that reason, but it was really peculiar. Another time when we were carrying pictures, we got off in a crowd of people. And you know, Michael, when you get off and you get in a crowd, you get in a long line to go through customs, right? So we got a lot of always carried a lot of stuff. So it takes us longer to get there, and the whole line is ahead of us. And we're way back down the line and thinking we'll never get a seat on the ferry boat because we're too far back. All the seats will be gone. Well, we're standing there talking. Lee gets tapped on the shoulder. It's a French customs officer. Tapped him on the shoulder and says, motion for us to come with him. And we went past all the people in the line. He opened another station to the left that was unmanned. Motioned for us through, checked our passports, stamped them, motioned us on. We got through, and he closed the station and went and left. Now, why that happened, I'll never know. When we got down on the starting platform, we were supposed to catch a certain train and car, we thought, and we asked there's a policeman there, where it was, should have been on this track, and just on that track over there, number 14. So we said, but it's over here. No, on that track over there. But there's our train over there. So we followed him and went over there. And the train pulled out. And we got to our destination okay, but we were on a different train entirely. Well, that time we had some intelligence agents following us that somebody didn't want following us, and they got on the right train, and we're on the wrong train. And the intelligence agents that thought they were on a car we were on got into a fight on a railroad platform in Amsterdam, were arrested and thrown in jail. And when we got to London and we're taking to Mark off Nathan's office, he says, what the hell do you do? Whoever taught you to sanitize a trail like that? We said, what do you mean sanitize a trail? He says, how do you give my men the slip? They're the best in the business. We said, we didn't know we gave anybody the slip. He says, 2 men over in jail over there. He had to send 2 more men to get them out, take them more passports and get them out. Now, why that kind of interference? I mean, why is that happening over a case that is ridiculous? It's a UFO case. The government says they don't exist. And somebody's spending an awful lot of money. They're spending as much money to follow us as we're spending to get there. And this just went on and on all the way through the case. How long have we been going here? Oh, my God. You want a break? You want to stand up and stretch a minute? Okay, let's take about a 5-minute break and just stretch. If you have to go to the bathroom, do so. Jesus Christ, we're running out. I was at the house, and Meier had been ill all day. He had the flu, and he hadn't eaten any breakfast, he hadn't eaten any lunch, and it was late in the afternoon, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and he was pretty weak. He'd been laying on the sofa all day. And I was standing in front of the television set watching a news program when I heard him make a little noise, and I looked around and he motioned for me to come over to him. So I went over there. There was a glass of water on the table. He was too weak to even pick the glass of water up at the time. And I bent down to see what he wanted, and he whispered, "Get Elsie." So I went to get Elsie, and she listened to him, and she went and got his wife, and between the two of them, they got him up off the sofa, walked in between them into the bedroom and disappeared. And then they came out. One was carrying boots and a boot shining kit, and another one brought a shirt out and set up an ironing board and started ironing the shirt. And I said, "What's going on?" And Elsie said, "Well, he's been summoned for a contact." I said, "In that condition, how can he go to a contact?" She said, "He'll make it." So he came out after having taken a bath, and he before a contact, he takes a bath, and he changes all of his clothes from the inside out, underclothes, outer clothes. His shoes are shined. They clean up everything. He brushes his hair, combs out his beard, like he's going to a big business meeting. And he came out about an hour later and into the kitchen, where I'm out there with the women drinking coffee and watching what's happening. And they brought out his pistol and his walkie-talkie. His pistol, mind you, is a .40 .44, an old Western .44. It's the heaviest gun in the world. It's got a bore on it like that, and it weighs a lot. I can hardly lift the thing. And that's what he carries for protection. He carries it in a big holster on the side. And he took that out, and he sat down at the table, dumped all the bullets out, and looked in the barrel, put the bullets back in again, put it together, put it in his holster. And then he took the walkie-talkie, opened it up, and dumped the batteries out, and put fresh batteries in. Then he put his wife came out with an Air Force B-4 jacket, a blue jacket with a mouton collar, fake fur collar, because it had been raining all day. It had been raining the day before, all night, all this day, and it was still drizzling. It was lightly raining. There's little raindrops bouncing in the puddles that were all over the place because it had been raining so long. So they put this coat on him to protect him from that. He didn't wear anything on his head, and he's standing in front of the stove, which is at one end of this big oak table in the kitchen. I was at the other end at the sink pouring me a cup of coffee. People started coming in the door from work. It's about 6 o'clock now. Well, it was later than that. It was about 8 o'clock. And they were coming in the door from work, and they see him already. They know where he's going. They just look at him and ask a couple of questions and go on about their way. The things. A few stood there waiting to see when he was going to leave, but he's all prepared, but he hasn't got the final signal of where he's going and when. And finally, I'm just pouring a cup of coffee when he raised his little hand and kind of a wave to them, a salute, and started out the door. He finally got the word. So I set my coffee cup down, and I raced around the table and out the side door. I want to see him go. I missed everything else. I'm going to see it this time. And as I passed the stove, the clock was right over the stove. It said 8:25. I remember that. And when I got to the door, the big dog that was chained on a chain could run right out just close enough to scare the hell out of you, but he couldn't bite you because he was restrained. And I jerked the door open. The dog just missed me, and I went out the door and into a lean-to. It was a lean-to like this that ran about 15 feet to a door that went outside. And I got out into the lean-to to see the door in the end of it closing on his heels. And I ran to the door and jerked it open like that, because I'm not going to let him out of my sight. And when I jerked it open, there's 1, 2, 3 footsteps in the mud out there. The ground was soft enough, the mud squished out of the footprints like that. And water was bouncing in, the little drops were bouncing in the puddles all around. Water was starting to run in the first footprint. And there was no fourth footprint. And it was quiet. It was silent. There was no noise out there. There was no light, no beacons, no sound of any kind, and he's gone. And I thought, he couldn't have. How could he get up? Could he back up? No, he'd back into me. Did he run around the house? Couldn't run around the house. I even ran around the house to see if he could have, and all I left was slippery, muddy prints out there. And I got all wet waiting for him to come back. And I missed him going, so I want to see when he returns. And I got all wet. I went in, changed clothes, and I put on a raincoat, and I went back out. Was standing outside when there was a telephone call ring in the house, and somebody answered it upstairs and then raised the window and said, it's Billy, he's down, he's over at Elg, and he wants you to come with his wife and Jacobus to pick him up. So we got in the car and splashed through puddles, and the rain was pouring down in some places and just drizzling in others. There was a lot of mud and slipping around on those mountain roads. We went all the way around the mountain, about 18 miles to Elg to pick him up. And when we got there, we found him standing under that little eave. It's only about 3 boards wide, over 3 steps that goes into the side of a guest house. And he's standing under the eave, and he doesn't have any mud on his shoes. He's not wet. His hair's not wet. Dry as could be, and he's been out in the storm for some 45 minutes. It was, when the call came in, it was about 20 after 9, and he went out at 8:25. So he got in the car, and he's obviously dry, and I said, can you tell us anything about what happened? He said, oh, I don't want to talk about it, Mr. Stevens. Now I have to back up a minute because I forgot one thing. When I came in, when I was all wet, came in the house and changed clothes, and I came downstairs, the Germans were all bunched up in front of their television set there watching something on the screen. So I went in to take a look. And on the screen was black with white letters on it. It just a big cross, and it said in German, the Pope has passed. The Pope has died. And I said, how did he die? And they said, haven't made any announcement yet, just the music and the sign. The program stopped, the sign, the music, that's all. No announcement. So I thought, well, hell, I don't need to watch this. I want to go out and see the big thing. I want to see him come back. So I went outside to wait, and then they got the call, and he came back, and now we get in the car, and And I said, I'm trying to make conversation, and he's facing the front, and his wife is sitting next to me in the back. And I said, did you hear the news? He said, you mean about the Pope? And I said, yeah. They haven't even announced how he died yet. We don't know what happened. He said his pump failed. His heart failed. I said, how'd you know that? He said, I watched him. And I thought, oh, this is really strange. And I asked him some more questions. He said, I don't want to talk about it, but when we got to the house, the Germans all went in the living room and closed the door, and they stayed in there talking and talking and talking. Nobody came out, so I finally got tired and went to bed. And I'm up early the next morning to see what happened the night before. And he got up about 10 o'clock, and I waited from 6 o'clock till 10 o'clock for him to get up. And I tried to ask him questions in the kitchen, and he motioned for me to come out on the patio. And we went out there, and he said, sit down, Mr. Stevens. I did. He said, I watched them murder a pope last night. And I said, murder a pope? They don't murder popes. He said, they do. They've done it before, and they did this one. He said, I saw the whole thing on the viewing screens. He said, they showed me who did it, how it was done, why they did it, everything. And he said, and I kept insisting they don't murder popes, and he kept saying, but they did. And then he said, he gave me the reason for it. And then he said, I can tell you something else, Mr. Stevens. He said, the next pope, his successor, will be elected in the largest conclave in history, in the shortest ballot in history. He'll be elected on the third ballot. He'll be the 33rd pope, reign 33 days, die by the same hand. And I thought, Jesus, now I got something I can really test. So I made very careful notes when I got back to my room. I wrote down exactly what he said, and I brought it home with me. And I showed it to other people, and you know what happened? That next pope was elected on the biggest conclave in history because they had more cardinals than they've ever had. He was elected on the third ballot. The only pope was ever elected on the third ballot. He was not the 33rd pope the way we count popes, so that was wrong, but he died on the 33rd day by a heart failure. The same, in the Catholic dictionary, they have the same description for his heart failure. It's a heart spasm. It's a cramp in the heart. And Meier is telling me on the patio out there that they used a poison that causes the heart to cramp, goes into a cramp. And it only lasts, they say, it evaporates out of the body in the temperature of the blood, the heat of the blood, and is gone in about 10 minutes, but it's long enough for it to kill the body. And no autopsy will detect it. They just die of a cramp in the heart. A heart seizure is what they call it. So exactly that happened. I waited 33 days. 3 days, they elected the next pope, and 30 days later, he died the same way. So that was one thing that I could test, and there's a lot of things like that. Now, I don't want to take all the time here. I've already gone too far with my time. I would kind of block this out because Michael Hessman, sitting down here, has been to Switzerland. He's met and knows all the principals. Billy's an old friend of his now, many of the other people there. And I'm going to ask Michael to come up and tell you a little bit about how he got into the case and what he thinks of it. But I want to introduce Michael Hessman, who has also followed up on the work that we were doing there in more recent time, and he has a whole lot new information for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wendell.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much, Wendell, for your interesting memories of the early investigation of what might very well be the most important contact case in the 1970s and 80s at least, and definitely in Central Europe. So, since there was such a controversy around the Billy Meier case, we decided to reopen the investigation because of the controversy and because the situation in the meantime has changed, because many more people claim to have experiences. And I tell you, when I heard about the Meier case in the very beginning, when I was still a young investigator, I was very skeptical. I couldn't believe that indeed these amazing pictures are real. I couldn't believe that, I don't need this, I couldn't believe that, and I don't need this, I'm tall enough, and I couldn't believe that the Pleiadians are regularly contacting just a normal human being in Switzerland. So my original point of view was rather skeptical, it was rather critical. I changed my opinion totally when I met Guido Moosbrugger, who is a school professor of Austria, who is a very close friend of Billy Meier, a man I highly respect because of his personal integrity and because what he told me about his own experience was really impressive because of the great sincerity of this highly educated man. And I got the impression that indeed something real happened, and I got the impression that it is worth to look especially to the eyewitness situation. I think the eyewitness situation is the key to the Meier case, because today in a time when everything can be faked by computer technique, by digital technology, by copying and masking and whatever, Photoshop, it is more important than ever to listen to eyewitnesses, to independent people who have experiences which very well might have changed their life. And you can manipulate every picture, but you can never manipulate the eyewitness factor. You can send some balloons up or whatever, but what these people reported have nothing to do with balloons or deception. It has to do with objects under intelligent control who perceive maneuvers which no terrestrial plane can ever imitate. In the reopening of the Meier case, we concentrate our investigation on different aspects than in the original investigation Colonel Stevens and his team made in 1978, 1979, 1980. Because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. So we just have to find a different angle. And they, at that time, concentrated on the investigation of the pictures, of the metal samples, and of what I call phase 3 of the Billy Meier contacts. You must understand that Billy had his earliest contacts when he was a little boy, okay, when he was 7 years of age in 1942. And this was the first phase of contact when he received all original teachings by a Pleiadian called Svat. A little bit later, Svat introduced to him a lady called Asket, and this is phase 2, the Asket contacts, which happened at a time when Billy was sent all around the planet to learn. And he visited 42 countries of the planet. Funny enough, the same number I visited. I visited 42 countries too. But he visited in a different way. He walked and he hitchhiked and he went by buses and whatever all over the Middle East. Believe me or not, but I saw the pictures as evidence. He met the brother of King Hussein of Jordan, the late great little king. Great because he was one of the greatest politicians, and little because he was really a small man, but a real great man. I have great admiration for King Hussein. And he met his brother and was his bodyguard for some time and driver. Keep in mind that Swiss people are highly respected in the Middle East because they are very professional people. They are very good in everything they do. We have a great admiration for Swiss people in Germany too. And this Billy Meier, and it's funny that his son seems to follow it, his official name is Eduard Albert Meier. But he was called Billy because he met an American lady who said, "Oh my God, you look like Billy the Kid, don't you?" And why? Because he just looked like Methuselah, his son looks today. He used to dress like a man from the Wild West, wearing black jeans, big hat, and so on and so far. And because he was very good with guns and everything, he also used to be bodyguard and driver and private investigators. And he did hundreds of jobs, literally, including working as a snake catcher in India. And when I heard this story the very first time, I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it until I met a lady whose brother was taught by Billy Meier how to catch snakes. But we will come to this later. So this phase, his learning years when he traveled around the planet, mainly Middle East, is phase 2 of the contacts. Phase 3 is the Semyaza contacts, which were so carefully investigated by Wendell Stevens and his team, but we don't have to go deeper into this one anymore. It's all documented. And phase 4 is after some years left the planet, the contacts which are still ongoing, the contacts with Quetzal and Ptah. And the last contact Billy Meier had just the night before his birthday on the 2nd of February 1999. So the contacts are still ongoing. And he regularly gets new information. When you investigate the Billy Meier case, the most important thing is to talk to the witnesses, because as I said before, you cannot fake witnesses. What we have here now is a situation of 50 eyewitnesses. But before we come to the witnesses, let me show you some of the most impressive evidence of the Billy Meier case. We were able to retrieve the original 8mm film Billy shot in 1975 and 1976, and to give it back to Billy after the originals were stolen from him. So these films are in the circulation. I will show you the complete wedding cake ship and tell you why it was not a trash can. Okay, and here we have one of the beautiful films Billy took in 1975 in an area called Berg Rumlikon, and this film was taken in June 1975, and the film you'll see after this was taken just from up there. So we have two films taken in the same general vicinity, and down here you have cars driving up and down on a kind of road, but you have this ship here making this hovering, but making this typical floating movements, which you will see in a moment, because I will show you a little later some comparative footage. Here are cars going up and down, and this is the location from which Billy took the film we see afterwards. This was a cut. It was not a movement of the craft, but a cut to a different sequence of the film. And here again, it makes some of these typical floating movements, and they have to do with the propulsion. They are riding on the gravitational waves of planet Earth, and to be in a hovering position always means a floating position, like a ship on the waves of an ocean is floating. Here is the area from which we took the other film, and now you see this film also from June 1975. Here you have the craft floating, and interestingly enough, Billy took a series of photos at the very same time, and on the photos you see a reflection of this street here on the lower side of the craft, clearly indicating that the craft was hovering beyond the street in a distance of about 300, 400 meters, what is about 900 to 1,200 feet. And again, note these floating movements, and in a moment it will shoot to the left. This is not a dematerialization. It shoots away. Very difficult to fake with the model. And in a sec later, it shoots back to this location, to the position where it was before. I was at that area together with Jaime Maussan from Televisa, Mexico in September, and we were able to measure the distances and everything, and we had a very, very interesting research trip. Here it shot back to the position with an amazing speed, and Billy is zooming into it. And here we have the same craft, and we will have an enlargement later. I made enlargement so you can see more details. But this is the original 8mm film as Billy took it. Of course, it lost a little bit of the color with the time. It was 25 years old when we retrieved it, and nearly 25, 23 actually, 23 years old when we retrieved it from, just to give Wennel the information, Ewart von Hagen. You know Ewart von Hagen. And he is a nobleman, old family, one of the oldest families in Europe, who is a big admirer of Billy Meier and got the film from him. So here we have the ship closer. Again, note the floating movement. Very interesting. And here Billy zooms in. It is not the ship coming closer, but Billy zooming, because you see the cloud also gets closer. So Billy is zooming in and out, but you get more details. And keep in mind, he does everything with one arm. This is another beautiful film taken in March of 1976, actually on March 29th, and at an Hasenbol area. And here you have the ship partially disappearing behind the hill. It is definitely beyond the hill. We analyzed it very carefully. And it sometimes disappears behind the hill and comes up again. So now it's moving up. Very slowly and deliberately. I mean, they can shoot away as we saw before, but deliberately, very slowly, so Billy has more possibility to film. These are mountains in the background, snow-covered mountains. And here we have Freecraft, beautiful film, also taken end of March 1976. Actually, can you turn on the audio? It has audio, and just to give you an idea how Billy edited it 25 years ago, because it's funny. Billy loved it. Another film from the same location a little bit later, and you see the object here, and it's moving now from the hovering position from left to right. The film originally is much longer. I'll just show you one sequence, one example, and you see how it moved, and now compared with another film.
Dieser Film wurde aufgenommen am 28. März 1976.
28 of March 1976, Billy says.
Oberhalb Fischental im Döstal, Kanton Zürich.
And now it's hovering again. And from the movement, how it really goes from the standing position to the movement back, they could analyze, the Japanese television people could analyze. It can never be a model, because a model would have some after movement, after going left and right. It wouldn't stand directly on the spot, but, you know, make some pendulum movements, and it does. This is still Billy Meier on the 29th, in this case, 29th of March 1976.
Auf einer weiteren Filmaufnahme vom 28. März
28, okay. Wendell got it wrong in his book. I copied this from your book.
Jedoch bereits in den Abendstunden kurz vor Sonnenuntergang.
In the evening hours, just before sunset.
Bei diesem Filmteil können Sie einige wenige Einzelheiten des Schiffes
and you
erkennen.
see some details of the ship. I translate what Billy says.
Langsame sich Drehen des Schiffes während
like a slight rotating
aber auch
movement,
das
rotational movement,
Aufleuchten
and you
von
have
Lichtern
these objects
am
here.
Schiff selbst.
And you see the slight rotation. Here we have enlargements from the Billy Meier films. We enlarge them so you see more details. And this is again the film we saw before from June 1975 from the Berg-Rumlikon area. And you can study the movements, and you can study how it is shooting away, and there was no cut. And here you have another detailed shot. This is now all edited. If the craft stops, it is just from me stopping it on a projector, on the recorder. But you see this beautiful original Samyasa beam ship Type 2 with the reflection here, and you can really see the shape. This is also frame by frame, so you'll see more details of this craft. Beautiful reflection right here. And keep the shape in mind, because in a moment we have pictures from Mexico and the USA, which are very, very similar. Note the movement. Note that the top is going left and right and left and right, which would not happen if it would be a model on the string. This picture was taken in June of 1992 near Puebla, Mexico, the same type of craft. Puebla, Mexico, also 1992, the same craft, maybe even photographed at the very same day. These are pictures taken in Mexico by independent witnesses which have nothing to do with the Billy Meier case. They never met Billy, they have nothing to do with Figu or whatever, same type of craft. This is shot in the USA in Colorado by, was it Joe Clower? Wendell? Yes. Yeah, this is by Joe Clower. You find it in one of the calendars of Wendell. This is USA, Colorado. Another picture, Los Angeles, California, also published by Wendell, but it has nothing to do with him, of course. He got these pictures from eyewitnesses. This is a beautiful picture taken on the 3rd of March, 75 from Billy, and you have the Semyaza beam ship, and you have this small thing. This is about 4 meters in diameter. And we have the same type of craft photographed in Mexico, for example, and I'll show you the pictures in a moment. This is a picture of Mexico. You see the balls, the shape. It is not the Adamski craft. It's too flat. This is taken in Nuevo Leon, Mexico in 1994, a picture taken by Pepe Martinez, and you see the same type of craft photographed by a totally independent witness. This is the picture from April of 1998, taken by Edith, a lady from Zurich. It's the same type of craft Billy photographed in 1975. The picture was taken in the area of Lago Maggiore. And here you compare the shape, and you have reflection here on the left side too. So on both craft you have a reflection on the left side. What I'll show you now is the film of the wedding cake ship. And in a moment it's a little bit out of focus. Can we focus it a little bit more? Here you have a tree and the wedding cake ship. And this is Billy. And we can have audio. And can you focus it a little bit? Here's Billy. You see the big distance of about 300, 400 meters. Now this is Billy made it. Okay, but anyway, you see it. And you see the big, large tree. This is a kind of pine tree. They call it weather pine tree. They are freestanding pine trees. And we analyzed it very carefully, the light reflections, everything. Here, the lower side compared to the upper side. This is a big, tall tree, and the object really is not somewhere in between, but the object really is, part one, thank you, and the object really is hovering in front of it in 300 meters distance. Can we play fast forward until we see Billy? I want you to see and listen to Mr. Billy Meier, who unfortunately cannot be here. Yeah, play fast forward. Okay, stop. Okay.
Why haven't you given interviews,
The
or
voice of
you
Jaime
don't
Maussan.
want to talk publicly about what happened to you 20 years ago?
Billy, warum geben Sie
I
keine
translate,
Interviews?
and at the
Warum
end,
reden
after
Sie
he spoke,
so
I
ungern
translate
über
into
das, was
English
vor
for you, so you can
23
understand it.
Jahren oder vor 20 Jahren mit Ihnen geschah?
Meine Aufgabe ist nicht, selbst an die Öffentlichkeit zu treten und mich bestaunen zu lassen, mich wie ein Tier begutachten zu lassen. Ich bin kein zoologisches Tier und so weiter und so fort. Meine Aufgabe liegt eben darin, die Dinge, die Berichte, die ich erhalte und die Mission, die ich habe, zu erfüllen, die Dinge aufzuschreiben, zu veröffentlichen und auf diese Art und Weise an die Öffentlichkeit zu treten, aber nicht in eigener Person. Und andererseits ist es eben auch so, wenn man an die Öffentlichkeit tritt, dann beginnen die Leute einem hochzuheben. Sie, wie wir in der Schweiz sagen, sie himmeln einem an. Und das ist nicht das, was ich gebrauchen kann und nicht das, was ich will.
Okay, I translate here from directly. We asked him why he doesn't go public, why he doesn't give interviews or something like this, why he doesn't lecture. And he said, first of all, it is not his mission. He doesn't want people to admire him. He doesn't want people to look at him like a zoological animal, like something strange. His mission is to write down the messages he received
Changed
and not to
many
play any
people,
special
the
role or
lives
to
of
be
many
admired
people.
or whatever. He doesn't want this.
Do you
That's why
think
he
the
is keeping
case,
himself, his own person, in the
fulfill
background.
its purpose?
And
Was this mission
that's
from
a
the
very
Pleiadians
humble, normal point of
fulfilled?
view. And actually, he lives a very normal life besides of being a contactee.
Ich muss das so sagen, die Menschen, die die Dinge übernehmen, was ich bringe von den Pleiadiern oder einfach aus der Lehre des Geistes heraus, das hilft den Menschen weiterzudenken, sich zu evolutionieren und
The teachings
einen
he gets from
besseren
the
Weg des
Pleiadians
Lebens zu
help
finden,
people
die
to
Tatsachen
evolve,
zu erkennen,
to
die
evolve and to
Wahrheit
find
zu
the meaning
erkennen,
of
so
life
wie
by
sie
themselves.
ist.
They are not doctrines or whatever, but they people on the path, and they are helps and instructions for people. And that's why he is doing it, why he's spreading it and publishing it.
And are you happy with the experience after 20 years? Are you happy with what happened, or you think it was a failure?
Ich denke, dass alles, was sich abgespielt hat, was sich zugetragen hat in Bezug auf die Pleiadier und in Erfüllung der Mission zusammen mit all den Menschen, die rund um mich sind und mit mir arbeiten, hat es sich sehr gelohnt. Und
It was worth to do. We asked, are you happy with what happened in the last 20, 25 years? And he says, yes. If I reflect what happened to all the people around me, the people who got inspired, I think it was worth to do it.
Negativ reingekommen sind, Misserfolge gebracht hätten oder dergleichen. Es ist genau das Gegenteil der Fall.
And even when we were attacked, the opposite happened of what the attackers want. And more people learned about the case and the teachings and looked at it. So all the attacks had an opposite outcome.
A positive way, a way which brought joy and support. And generally, when something negative came out from outside, it always turned to become good at the end. So generally, everything went well.
Es ist also nicht so, denn wenn Angriffe von außen kamen, dass für uns und für unsere Mission irgendwelche negativen
If we were attacked from outside, it didn't mean a negative influence,
Es hat sich immer zum Erfolg gewandelt.
but it turned to the positive always, to the success always.
Wurden die Erfolge.
As harder we were attacked, as more people we reached.
Negative at the end. As more we were attacked, as more success we had.
Or very.
in our mission.
Es bedingt einfach, dass man eben bei der Sache bleibt
It's
und sich
important to
nicht
stay behind what you're doing and what you believe
unterdrücken
in
lässt, dass
and
man
what you
sich nicht
stand
ins
for,
Boxhorn jagen lässt, wenn
and
Angriffe
not
kommen
to be
von außen,
distracted,
sondern dass man einfach auf seiner Linie bleibt.
but simply to stay
Important to
upon
follow the line,
your line.
stand behind what you believe in, and don't become discouraged by attacks from outside.
Die waren niemals hier droben, die kennen mich überhaupt nicht, die haben niemals ein Wort
the people
mit
who
mir
attack
gesprochen.
him,
Die haben
they have
einfach
never
alle
been
Dinge
up
aus
there,
der
they
Luft
never
gegriffen.
talked to him,
Oder
they
von
never met him in
anderen
person,
Negierern
they never interviewed the
irgendwelche
eyewitnesses,
Dinge
what is a
gehört
matter
und
of
dann
fact.
weiter negiert.
And how can they write about me if they don't never met me and don't know what is really going on?
They just either, invented the attacks or took it over from other people who attacked me before.
And many
but
of
they
the
never cared to investigate.
Meier debunkers just copy
They
from
even
each
said
other.
that you cry and you accepted that everything was a hoax.
Die Gegner behaupten sogar, dass
They even claim, the debunkers even claim that Billy Meier confessed. But it's a hoax, and this is his reaction, he is laughing.
Ein Wort davon.
Not a single word is true.
Well, that's what they say. But still, we know that all the analysis, the metal, the movies, the pictures, the witnesses, the sounds, everything so far has stand all these attacks.
Ja, I know.
And after all this experience and the attacks, would you do it again?
nach all den Erfahrungen, den Angriffen, würdest du es wieder machen?
genau dasselbe.
I would do exactly the
Ich
same again.
würde, wenn ich nochmals vorn beginnen wüsste
If I would
und
have to
alles
start
so
from
wüsste,
very
wie
beginning
ich es
again,
heute weiß, ich würde rein nichts ändern
I
daran. Ich
wouldn't
würde
change
auch mein
anything.
gesamtes Leben so leben, wie
I would
ich
live
es
all my
bisher
life
gelebt habe.
just the way
Und auch in Bezug
I lived
auf
it.
die Mission, da würde ich alles genau gleich machen.
In regard to my mission, I would do exactly what I did.
And I would do exactly the same, even if I would have known everything.
I wouldn't change
before.
anything.
In der Form zu bearbeiten und in der Form mit ihr zu leben, wie es notwendig ist, in positiv ausgeglichenem Rahmen, dann zerstört er seine Erde nicht. Es heißt seit
It's about the question if man will destroy the planet. He says if man learns to live in harmony with creation and according to the laws of creation, he will not destroy the planet. All the rumors about doomsday in the year 2000, the end of the world, whatever, is rubbish. The earth will not come to an end. Even if some catastrophes happen and will happen and always happen, even if some wars will start, it does not mean the end of the world. The end of the world will come in some distant future through to the sun, which is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. And one day, automatically, and it's an astronomical fact, the sun will exterminate life on Earth, and this is when man will go to other planets and settle on other planets. But this is an astronomical fact. But before it, there will be no end of the world. So do not believe in doomsday prophets and maniacs.
Späteste Zeit, wo sich der Erdenmensch irgendwelche andere Welten sucht, wo sich wieder ansiedelt.
April 1981. Okay.
Es sind also böse, negative und falsche
They're
Zukunftsvisionen, die verbreitet werden,
wrong
dass der Mensch
future
die Erde,
visions are the ones who
zerstört.
claim that man will destroy the planet in a way that no life can exist on it anymore. This is not what the future of Earth will be, according to the Pleiadians. Okay, I show you quickly where Billy is living. This is Hinterschmied Rüti. This is in the winter, in February, in a winter evening, beautiful landscape. This is the house where he lives. This is Billy's farmhouse where he and some of his friends live together because Billy as a contactee is working for his mission all the time. Stop. And he is a contactee, so he can't, have a regular job and a regular income. So some of his friends who have normal jobs just rented the house and they live there together. Billy's group has the name Free Interest Group for Spiritual and Ufological Studies, what means in German the acronym FIGO for Freie Interessengemeinschaft für geisteswissenschaftliche und Ufologiestudien. But every single human being must recognize that its purpose in life, its meaning of life is evolution by recognition. Evolution by recognition and not by believing anything. Billy is the biggest non-believer I never met. He doesn't, he doesn't teach any doctrine and he doesn't want anybody to believe anything. This is not what the Pleiadians teach them to do. Man has to evolve, each and every one by himself.